welcome to today's webinar, Roadmap and Strategy Update for SDL WorldServer. My name is Kate and I will be your host today. With the upcoming release of SDL WorldServer 11.4, we're hosting this webinar to introduce the new capabilities, features and improvements, as well as provide an update on our roadmap. Your speaker today is Ray Hopley, Product Management Director for SDL WorldServer. We expect today's webinar will last about 40 to 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. I will now pass you over to Ray to begin the presentation.
Great, thank you very much for the introduction, Kate, and welcome everybody to today's presentation. This is the update for the WorldServer roadmap, and obviously as plans shift and the future direction concretizes, we need to provide updates, and that's what today's session is all about. Hopefully you'll find it useful. So I always start with the high-level themes. So the user interface, of course, the modern user experience. We've started a number of initiatives a couple of years ago with the new user interface on WorldServer 11. We've obviously got some other work to do in the UI that you'll hear a little bit more about in some detail regarding applet replacement. And obviously the goal here is to provide the best-in-breed user experience for all of the different user personas. So that's obviously a key focus area. Online enablement, so this really is about the online editor, and there's some updates to provide you with for that particular piece. And then customer satisfaction, of course, is a given. This relates not only, of course, to fixing defects, but also to listening to customer enhancement requests and prioritizing those and delivering those as the roadmap allows as we go through, also delivering on our strategic objectives. So those are the three main focus areas that we have. Nothing too surprising there. I wanted to start with a little recap of where we're at currently with the releases. It says 11.3 here. Technically, the latest release came out in May was 11.3.1. Obviously, that's a point release, so I'm going to focus on some of the things that we've done with 11.3 and built on with 11.3.1. The theme really for that release was around quality. So there is this synchronization between the quality model in WorldServer and translation quality assessment functionality that's available in Trados Studio. There is a workflow-based auto action QA checker, and then we've got a couple of other enhancement requests. The project settings button, which you'll see, that's part of the bigger story around replacing the Explorer applet. I'll come to that a little later. And then email notifications on due date changes. This is product management functionality improvements, and that was, as we know, one of the key focus areas, particularly with the new UI and delivering on those enhancement requests. Some other background work, so as well as focusing on the UI, there's a lot of work that's required in the back end as well, not only for supporting that new UI with the API endpoints, but also things like database support, platform support. Architectural modularization sounds very grand. That's a lot of engineering effort spent on decoupling some of the layers within the application so that we have a much more streamlined and componentized architecture. Obviously, that's not something that you'll see, but that's something you'll feel the benefit of in terms of our ability to innovate and also in terms of performance and stability. So that's kind of the summary at a glance, as it says there. So a little bit of a show and tell around the TQA round trip, as we're calling it. So on the left, you'll see the definition of the quality model as it is defined in WorldServer within the enterprise application, governing the work packages that get distributed to the supply chain. On the right-hand side, you'll see the severities and categories in Trados Studio in the TQA functionality that it match exactly what's defined in WorldServer. And actually one of the things we did with 11.3.1 to benefit from this a little more easily is loosen a little bit the restrictions around when the TQA settings get included in the package. We found that it actually was a little bit too restrictive with the initial release, and we've loosened that a little bit so that now more people can benefit from this and are not limited to a workflow step type of review, which you may not necessarily have configured. So there's the summary. We define within the enterprise application the matrix of quality metrics, and we distribute those in the translation review packages, and then within the Trados Studio application you can do that detailed scoring and metric recording that are then consumed back into the WorldServer database once you return those packages to WorldServer, and from there you can write all kinds of reports and derive analysis from that data. So again, it's really joining up the supply chain, that feature, but with a focus on quality tracking. Automated QA checker, I won't read out all the text, I'll try to highlight what's in this. It's, I guess, a first iteration of this QA check, and it checks whether all segments have been translated, whether the tags match in the target versus what's in the source, and whether they're in the same order. This is an optional parameter. Whether they're in the same order isn't always required, and sometimes isn't, shouldn't be there. And then the final one is about checking terminology. So we read from a WorldServer TD, and we can then verify if the particular source term appears in the source text, that the required equivalent translation is also present in the target. And there's a nice report that's generated. It's actually, here's the human readable version, so we output it in two formats actually. One is HTML, which you can see here, so it's nice and easy to read, so you can see which segments have failed a particular QA check, what that check was, and then it tells you the source and the target. We also output this in XML in case you wish to download it and consume it into a separate application or database offline within your own network or wherever that might be. But we provide, the idea is to provide data that's processable and also data that's readable by a human. That's the goal here. So how does this help me? Okay, focus on quality. That's very nice. We're trying to, attack that problem from both ends. One is guaranteeing quality, the quality assurance steps, but then there's also the quality metrics so that a reviewer can take the translated output and then do that scoring and consume that data back into WorldServer. This is me doing a little bit of self-promotion. I recorded a webinar. If anybody missed it, I do this every quarter. This one was back in February with a focus on quality. There is another one that I did more recently in May around GDPR. I'm not going to talk about GDPR today. If you want to, you can go to the Bright Talk website and find that one. It's about enabling GDPR compliance as a WorldServer administrator. Anyway, back to the roadmap. So yeah, there is some detail in this particular webinar about how these features can work together and not only guarantee quality, but actually allow you to record it and measure it. Okay, so as well as other smaller items, as I mentioned, the loosening of the restrictions around TQA in the Studio packages, we added another new button, again, the focus on project manager efficiency. Create from existing was a request from quite a number of customers around, I've defined a very complex project with lots of project attributes, and I want to reuse that with some new source files. So rather than having to enter everything again, you can select a project and use create from existing, and it copies over all the values apart from the files, the source files, and the due date, which could potentially not be relevant if you're copying from a previous project. But this, again, is all around the user experience and the user efficiency in their day-to-day operations. There's a link also there to the other items that are included, and there are some defect fixes and a couple of other smaller items. Okay, so that was where we are, 11.3, 11.3.1 actually, having delivered on that quality theme. We've obviously been busy working away on this strategic goal of improving the UI. As it says there, get rid of some baggage. I've got some nice demos of the new workflow editor to come. And so we're busy working away and removing those things. So I mentioned also scalability and robustness. This is really a given for an enterprise application with the kind of heritage that WorldServer has. As we see increasing volumes from really across the install base of various different content types, so we're bringing in more and more content for localization. We need to make sure that WorldServer is ahead of the curve there in terms of scalability and robustness, and we're constantly working away in the background. Again, it's not all things that you see, but it's really about guaranteeing the place of WorldServer as this kind of the hub generating localization work packages from all of those enterprise content streams. And part of that is this evolution of the REST API, which we introduced with WorldServer 11, and with every release we continue to build that out so that it's becoming more fully fledged API that you can then build your own customizations on. There's a little bit more in the roadmap at the end around REST API and documentation. So you will have heard me talk about applet replacement plans. Those plans are coming to fruition. In fact, if we think about the Explorer approach that we're taking, which is not to replace the component with another kind of pseudo file system representation, it has some real scalability issues. Actually, the more projects you create, the bigger the list gets. And so the idea was that we wouldn't actually just replicate that, because really when people go to the Explorer applet, they're looking for a specific project. And the idea is to move the functionality that you have in Explorer to those project pages. And you'll see some scripts support that. For the other applets, Workflow Editor, for example, offers a very discrete and defined set of functionality. There isn't really a way not to replace it, so that's what we're doing, and you'll see the output of the work that's been going on for the last considerable number of months that's now come to fruition. And obviously then Business Rules applet, it will follow on. So the current state of play for the Explorer applet, for those who are struggling to load it in more modern browsers, there is an option that's been there since WorldServer 11.1 actually to not load it in the browser window, which is obviously subject to security concerns, but you can set a parameter, and instead of loading it in the browser, it creates this link that you can see here, and it downloads Explorer as an applet that runs, as an application, not an applet, that runs on your desktop, but still is able to communicate back and forth with WorldServer. So this option is available, bypasses those browser security concerns. Obviously, it's a stopgap solution, but it is there if you're having those difficulties. So with 11.3, we introduced this concept of project settings. It's called project settings because that really aligns, again, this part of the broader convergence topic, and that relates also to the way that we label the functionality. It aligns with the way that Trados Studio and other SDL translation software calls these things. We're probably familiar with them more maybe as AIS properties in the WorldServer dialect. Also project types utilizing the same objects, so translation memories, TM groups that are there, terminology and other things. But here you can see it triggered from the project page itself. As I said, the idea with the Explorer replacement is not just to build another copy of Explorer with the issues that it has, but really to think about the user experience as a project manager wishing to change the TM sequence that's applied to a particular project. I go to that project page, and then I can do it from there. That's the approach that we've taken. Here again, a quick mock-up, so you can upload files in Explorer, and you'll be able to do that also through the project streams. This is coming in an upcoming release. It's not there yet. This is already available as of 11.3, and then we've got more to come, obviously. So one of the big headline items for our 11.4 release upcoming, the next one, is the Workflow Designer, the workflow editing component. As you can see here, I have a workflow step selected, the review step. You'll see these two arrows that allow me to drag transitions, and here, because it's selected, I get the properties pane here. So again, that same new UI paradigm, no more pop-ups, but these kind of panels that slide in and out as and when you need to use them. So that's a couple more examples from the new workflow editor. There's actually a little, what I wanted to demonstrate with this video clip is taking an existing workflow, so as you can see it's drawn in the old style, and then edit it, and then you'll see it be populated in the new style. So let me just run that video. Hopefully you can see that clearly enough. So you launch the workflow editor from the same link as previously, but there's no applet pop-up. It opens in a new tab, and there you can see the new component. Again, you select a step, and the properties pane comes in. I'm going to actually modify one of the values here, so I'm going to set the task attribute to testing instead of test, and then I'm going to save the change that I've made to the workflow. And if you're quick, on the next screen, you'll see it refresh, the old image immediately replaced by the new one. So there you can see seamlessly all existing workflows can be loaded in the new editor, modified, and then saved back, and then the drawing, the diagram itself, is updated using the new component. But I must stress that all of the workflow logic is untouched. All of the execution, the transitions, the way that everything is managed through that workflow is completely unaffected. This is only about how we represent the workflow definition through that new UI component. Just wanted to make that clear. What I should also point out is you can see how I put the old version of that diagram in. Some of the connection points have shifted. Some of the transitions are drawn slightly differently. We did try, obviously, to be as faithful as possible to the original design, but because there are different UI technologies, there will be some small cosmetic differences, and I've got some more examples. This is a very, very simple workflow. This is much more complex, actually. This is a production workflow. Obviously much more complex. Somebody spent a lot of time drawing this, and you'll see here, for example, there's a nice neat ordering around the steps. I want to draw your attention to this area here where the transitions are, and then also down here where it gets a little bit crowded. And then I'm going to show you the equivalent version, which you simply load it into the new workflow editor component and save it, and you get that, which is a pretty faithful representation as far as I can tell. Some of the transitions here, like I said, have collapsed into a single line, but all of the logic is the same, and the step completion follows the same transitional logic. Here again, you'll see that there's a little bit of overlap, so if I just go back, there is a tiny gap here, but because of the sizing differences, we've been tweaking with these things so to try and get as close as possible to a fully faithful rendering. And there will be some cosmetic nuances, and if you need to, you can then modify those as well. So the transitions have changed as well. So here you'll see it's kind of collapsed into a single line. I have the flexibility. I can now drag this bar, for example, and move them around. I can, at will, add additional endpoints here, or midpoints, whatever you want to call them. As you can see here, I've made a funky angle, and you can go a little bit crazy with those things. You don't need to, but you have a lot of flexibility there if you feel the need to redraw the transitions between various steps, and you can separate again. So that's just an example. Different technology, obviously, underpinning that representation, and it offers some additional flexibility around the drawing. Okay, so that was the new workflow editor. That's obviously one of the highlights for the 11.4 release that's upcoming. As well as the new workflow editor, we're introducing a new single sign-on framework. This is designed to work with the new UI, so the 11 login page. Previously, you could do that with legacy login pages using UI hooks and various things. Those technology underpinning the UI have obviously changed, and with the new UI we've got this new single sign-on framework, which I've also got a little video to show in a moment. One of the other key areas is faster UI page load. We have seen in the new UI some limitations on very busy systems. Busy means having lots and lots of tasks. If you have many projects and they have one task each, that's not really the where you'll see any issues. But if you have many thousands of tasks within a project, then because we do some computations aggregating values to present things at the project group level, there was some lag in some of the page load, and we're addressing that with this next release. You'll see again many back-end performance improvements, again stuff you won't see necessarily in terms of features and functionality, but you should feel the benefit in terms of faster processing, faster uploads, and a number of other areas. Also, as with every release, we're introducing an update to the existing file types. With this one, we're also adding support for Microsoft Visio drawings as a translatable format, which has obviously been a long-standing request, and with every release we update them at least, and we're lucky now to be able to add another new one, which is really good. We've got some more in the works from our core components team who developed these file filters for all of the various translation applications. Stratos Studio, TMS Group Share, and WorldServer all benefit from that same core set of technologies, and we've got more new file types to come later in the year. But for 11.4, we'll see an update there. Okay, again, another quick video. This is to show the single sign-on framework. There is the option now to add another button which connects directly to your own identity provider platform. This section is a little bit more technical, and I'll try and describe it as simply as possible. So here I'm logging in with my WorldServer user account just to show you. I get in, I land on my home page. I'm going to log out now and then use the internal sign-in button. And what you see here, don't worry about this. This is simply a page, an application that we built let me just pause the video for a moment, an application that we built to demonstrate the single sign-on functionality. What we're doing here is trapping the request to the identity provider platform, which is within your corporate network that manages the authentication. This is when you log on to your computer in the morning when you come into work. I log in with my Windows credentials typically, and then, for example, at SDL, we also have introduced single sign-on for a number of our business applications. So if, for example, I then want to go to Perspective, which is an internal data analysis tool that we use, I don't have to log in anymore separately. And this is the goal with single sign-on. I log into my PC in the morning, and then I can go directly to WorldServer using those same credentials. But what I'm showing here is that we've tracked that request, and this is really where I'm going to end up. It's the WorldServer homepage again, so I'll carry on running that video. So I haven't entered any credentials. I had an active session there, and I simply click on internal sign-in. Because I have an active session running, because I've logged into my PC, I can get straight into WorldServer. I'm going to again, just to show you, it doesn't have to be the home page. You can redirect somebody directly to the project pages. You can take them directly to transport if they're only a transport user. Depending on what that user type functionality that is required for the individual users, you can customize this and take them to individual pages. So it's kind of again, I'm trying to describe something that you wouldn't normally see. The idea being that it simplifies, from a corporate perspective, the user management aspect with WorldServer, so that I can use my own corporate credentials to WorldServer. And this particular instance is using SAML 2.0, so that's one of the industry standards relating to federated authentication. Again, I don't want to get too technical in this roadmap call, but this is really allows you to transmit authentication tokens over the internet, actually over networks that are not in the same domain, and that gives you your corporate IT department a lot of flexibility about how to manage user accounts within WorldServer. Okay, so that's we'll step back out of the technical weeds for now. Talk about online enablement. That was one of the other themes. So, as I mentioned, this is really around working with the new online editor. I'll say new, it's been around for about a year now, and here you can see we've got translation memory lookup. We've got also the quality assessment, so again, that same theme around quality tracking. What's defined within WorldServer governs what's available also in Studio, but now also here in the online editor, so that if you have a reviewer who wants to start adding and recording details around the types of errors and the severities of those errors, and they can do that not only in Drata Studio on an offline mode, but also online now in the online editor. Okay, so there's WorldServer 11.5, so this isn't there yet, but back to that same quality theme. As well as the recording, we're also doing verification. So there's some nice work going on, just completing actually around interactive verification. So that as I confirm a segment, I'll see a pane appear down here recording any issues, so either errors or warnings. So additional space is not necessarily critical, but tags being removed, that's usually a bad idea. So this is why it's a more severe category than just adding an extra space. So this is coming by the end of the year. We'll have this in WorldServer. And again, it speaks to that same kind of industry theme around quality, both assuring it using verification tools and then also tracking it using translation quality assessment. So I should point out, as well as being interactive as you confirm a segment, there are also batch modes where you can do a full file in one hit as well. Okay, so that's really last year's roadmap, and then moving on to what we're doing this year. What's still to come is an 11.4 release, so this is in Q3, in around September timeframe is the target for that, just after summer. The Workflow Designer really is the headline there, as you've seen. Some nice work gone on to provide a seamless transition from the old legacy applet to a much more user-friendly component. Some more of that Explorer functionality will be migrated to the project pages. We've got the UI performance, and then of course updated file types. As we go towards the end of the year, there'll be a smaller scale release. This is what I called 11.5, where you'll see those QA checks in the online editor. I touched on the REST API earlier. One of the gaps that we currently have with that API is really not in the API itself, but in how to use it, and enabling you as sophisticated users to take advantage of that new, leaner, more robust API. And with that, there will be some nice code samples and some tutorials and general documentation around the REST API. And we're also looking at updating the Studio TM plugin. This has been around for a while on the roadmap now, and a couple of reasons why we haven't been able to deliver that, but this is still in plan. We want to, again, make sure that the work doer, wherever they are, and in this case using Trados Studio, has a seamless and performant user experience when they're connecting live to WorldServer hosted translation memories. Then as we go into next year, we're obviously going to finish the business rules wizard, change that from being an applet to being some web neutral technology. The archive viewer, I'll just explain what that means. It's really, again, about taking something that you can currently do with Explorer, moving it to a more logical and sensible place within the application, in this case, something that doesn't yet exist. But it's like we're going to create some additional pages where you will have access to the archive data that we store. And currently you can go to Explorer, for example, and still get archive files, and then you'd have to go to a report to get archived data out of the application. And here what we want to do is expose all of that historical data so that you, the users who have created that data, it belongs to you. It's really things like the leverage, might be who translated a particular file from 6 months ago, could be 5 years ago. But we record a lot of historical information, and it's not very easy to get at. That's one of the difficulties that people have with this. And so the archive viewer is really a way to allow a user to search on particular historical criteria and the date range, and then return a bunch of projects that there is still of interest to them. And it's kind of like a self-service access to that historical data. And of course, the next generation file processing service, you've heard me talk about this previous roadmap updates. That's work that continues on in the background. This is really the replacement for FTS currently. It will, again, use exactly the same core component filters, so there's nothing about leverage loss or anything like that here. This is really just replacing the service layer within the application that calls those same components, and it does so in a more robust and a scalable way, and it generates a much richer bilingual content structure that we can do a lot more with then, and then we're aligned with, again, the rest of the SDL Trados, the SDL portfolio, including Trados Studio, TMS, GroupShare, etc. And we're all, again, consuming those same technologies as you've heard me talk about before. Okay, so that's really the roadmap update I've got. There is, of course, the disclaimer. Plans do change, but this is certainly 11.4, 11.5. This is our goals for delivering those this year, and then obviously out into 2019. So I'm ready for any questions that might have come in. Kate, I'll hand back to you. I don't know if you can see any questions that might have come in.
Thanks, Ray. Yes, we've got one question come in, but if you've got any questions, please put them in the question box, and Ray will be sure to answer them. Okay, the question we've got that's come in is SSO only available using the new UI, or is it also available if upgrading under the legacy UI?
That is a good question. So the legacy UI already has a mechanism that you can use to support single sign-on. We have quite a number of customers who have done this, but it's a customization that's required in order to enable that. What we're delivering here in 11.4 is a single sign-on framework. It is only available for the new UI login page, and if you're defaulting to the classic view, then yeah, you won't be able to take advantage of this yet. My recommendation, of course, is 11.4 should allow people to start defaulting to the new UI, because we're going to fix some of the performance issues that people have reported, and also all of the new innovation, those new buttons I've been showing off around improved project management efficiency. All of that will only exist in the new UI. So that's kind of a long answer, but it is only the new UI for the single sign-on framework that we're delivering in 11.4.
Thanks, Ray. Another question's just come in. Will it be possible to host the online editor on the same server as WorldServer? Currently, a separate server is required.
Yeah, we've indicated in the documentation that a separate server is required, and this was really, to align with the best practice for you should have a separate server for FTS as well. In fact, you can run all of these components on the same server, but you obviously need to be careful with the number of concurrent users. Very quickly, you'll start consuming a lot of the memory, and then other processes that are running will end up being starved of server resource, and you'll hit issues. That's really why we made that recommendation. It all depends on, A, the scale of the infrastructure that you're running it on, and B, the number of concurrent users you expect to be using it. Because if the server is big enough and concurrency is not excessive, then indeed single deployment should be perfectly possible. I'm not sure who's asked that question. If you want to, I guess, contact me or go through the support channel to pose this question, we can talk about some of the details around which parameters you need to be considering when you're making this decision. But indeed, it's perfectly possible to do it, but the recommendation is to have dedicated infrastructure components.
Great, thanks, Ray. We don't have any other questions. Oh, no, one has just popped in.
Okay.
What are your plans for an API SDK for the online editor?
Indeed, that's a good question, which I've had a couple of times already. Those are really 2019 plans. It's definitely something that we have been thinking about and how to architect that. So, the goal would be to offer some kind of pluggable framework, very similar to the way that you can customize Trados Studio these days, and many people have taken advantage of that, and there's a very rich community delivering extensions to the core functionality through those plugins, and we want to enable that also for the online editor, but that's out into next year, according to the current.
Thanks. We've got another question that's just come in. Does the Studio TM plugin updates include both a switch to using the REST API as well as limiting access to only those TMs in WorldServer? They're indicated in the T-kit that was downloaded.
Judging by that question, I think I know who asked it. Yes, all of those things. We've talked about this a few times. There are a couple of areas where we really need to improve the performance of that plugin, and it's all around how much data we request, and it needs to be, obviously, since we're transmitting over potentially large geographic distances, to reduce any kind of network latency, we should always ask for the minimum information. Currently we don't do that, so this refers not only to getting the list of TMs, the list of supported languages in each TM, but also the number of segments that are returned when you do an actual TM lookup in the editor. So those three areas definitely need some optimization.
Okay, another question's just come in. When do you plan to include the upload, download on the project page?
Oh, indeed, that's in scope for 11.5, so by the end of this year we hope to have that to upload down. Well, the download is already there, but this is really about the upload, and also update as well. There's another piece that we need to include.
Okay, that seems to be all the questions. Have we got any other questions coming in? No, I think that's it. Thanks, Ray.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kate. Thanks, everybody, for attending.
So thanks for attending our webinar. We hope you found today's session useful, and we look forward to welcoming you again on one of our future webinars. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you.